Welcome to today's Corporate Venturing Insider series. Today I'm so excited to have Bonny Simi with us. She's going to speak about all the best practices she applied at JetBlue Ventures and what we should learn from that. Bonny, welcome.
Thank you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. I'd like to start by asking what was your personal journey into corporate venturing? And I know your journey is extraordinary, so please feel free to go as early as you want in your journey.
You know, when I started out my career very early on, corporate venturing or even venture capital was not in my radar at all. I was very much into aviation. I was a pilot, flew as a pilot for United and then JetBlue. But I gradually moved into leadership at JetBlue, and I've always had an innovative mindset. And so JetBlue is an innovation airline. They're, came to disrupt and bring humanity back to travel was the initial mission of JetBlue. And so as I moved through different operational roles, I was constantly tapped for, Bonny, how should we think differently about this area or that area? And I brought in, I had spent some time at Stanford learning design thinking. And so I look at design thinking as a tool. It's like learning Excel or learning some other kind of leadership tool, or it was a tool. And so I brought, and at this point now I was a VP of talent at JetBlue, so I was still a pilot, but mainly now on sort of the HR side. And I had leadership development was one of my teams. And I said, I'm going to bring this design thinking into JetBlue as a way to think differently about challenges and problems. So then I became really known as the innovation person internally. Fast forward a few more years. At this point, I think I'd been at JetBlue maybe 10, 12 years, and JetBlue was 15 years old, and the CEO calls me. He says, Bonny, we're 15 years, and I think we're becoming a little stale. We need to be more innovative nice. With our brand. He says, how do we become more innovative? And I said, well, the future of any industry starts early in startups. And so in order for us to see where the future is going, we should have a seat at the table of startups. And he says, well, how do we do that? And I said, well, I'm from Silicon Valley. I did grow up in the Bay Area, so I have 1 degree of separation from the startup ecosystem. And I said, well, we should invest in them. He said, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, we should set up a corporate venture firm. He's like, great, go do it. And sometimes it's like, careful when you raise your hand, you might actually be asked to do something. And so that's where the idea began, and it was in 2015. I'd been at JetBlue for 12 years in a variety of different roles, and I knew the company very, very, very well in all of the operational areas. And so
you was a perfect profile, actually, to start.
Yeah. So I had a ton of operational experience, plus I was in HR. And in HR, you learn a lot too. So and I'm from Silicon Valley. It was so nice because JetBlue's based in New York, and I was having to commute to the East Coast. And so I finally got to actually work and live in the same city. What a concept.
It's nice.
I set up, and then it was called JetBlue Technology Ventures. I set it up in 2016. And the first thing that I did really was to reach out to my friends and to learn on the venture side. Because when you think about corporate venture, you have corporate and venture. You need both. I knew the corporate side really well, but not the venture side. So that's kind of my goal was, I'm like, I'm going to make good returns for the company. This is great. And my personal goal is, someday if we're successful, we're going to have a Stanford Business School case study on JetBlue Ventures, on how it set it up as a case study, as a good example. And that happened.
So you use the card call a friend, which happens to be a common friend. And Linda was actually on this podcast as well.
Oh.
So maybe you could share about this calling a friend, Linda, and how did that help you set up the CVC?
Yeah, so when you raise your hand for something, and this is also a mission for women out there. Sometimes women tend not to raise their hand for something until they're 100%. They know everything 100% qualified. Like, I knew corporate well, not venture capital, but I definitely had call a friend. So this was probably in, I want to say, October of 25, and we were going to set this up in January of 26, or 16, 2015, 2016. And I'd known Linda Yates and Paul Holland, her husband, for many, many years, both personally, because we had gone family camping together, but also professionally, I knew Paul. He had worked at Foundation Capital, so he was a VC. And so I knew Paul actually more than I knew Linda. And he had asked me to come in for Foundation was doing an investment in an aviation company. And one of the partners knew aviation, but he didn't. And he said, will you come listen to their pitch and tell us? So I knew him from that, and we just became good friends. So I call him up and I said, look, I need to learn more about your space. And they were very active in sort of an incubator space as well. And so they helped kind of open the doors for me to get a space inside this incubation space. So that, and then they helped me understand all the various terms and introduced me to people. So it's, you know, I had coffee and lunch a couple of times, went over to their house, introduced me to more people, introduced me to more people. In the span of 3 months, I got a crash course. And I also knew I needed to hire investment professionals. My very next hire was someone, Raj Singh, who is an investment professional. And I believe he may have been on your podcast. If he hasn't,
but
you need to get Raj in there too. So, and Raj is amazing. And
he's now in a financial VC.
Yes, he's in a financial VC. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, think the world of Raj. So that was because I needed to have that. I was corporate, but I didn't understand the venture. So brought him in. He was my very, very first hire. So that's how. So Linda and Paul helped me think about it, introduced me to people. I didn't take a ton of their time, but you know we stayed connected, of course, as friends, but also professionally. And ultimately, they came full circle because they saw the corporate venturing world, and they've brought a very good experience and kept advising me. But then they would take that experience and advise someone else, and then they decided to open up a whole advising firm around corporate venturing, and it's been amazing. So it's kind of neat, I think, when the perfect type of helping each other out in an ecosystem is the helping each other out. And initially, I thought it was me going to them just as friends. I'm like, help me out here.
It's paying forward.
And then in the end, it's paying forward, right? Because they then ended up taking that and building out a great practice. And so I believe they have they help.
Actually, So you may not know, I think you were the first, not customer, but it was the first time they were helping on corporate venturing. Then they had Conviviality Ventures they helped. That was our real first customer. I was a second customer. And I think at that point they realized, okay, we're onto something. There is a need, and CVCs need to learn more about VC and financial as well as corporate. And I think that's how they started.
And that's literally what they did, helped me understand VC and then realize, yes, there's a market, there's a product market fit. And because back then, VCs looked at CVCs as bad money. Because...
Or dumb money.
Dumb money. Yeah, not bad money. Dumb money. Because
there's no bad money. But
dumb money, as I rephrase that, dumb money. All those CVCs that don't know the venturing side of things. And so, and I was hell-bent to make that not the case. And that's when, so VCs didn't want to have much to do with CVCs initially. And I think what Paul and Linda did is kind of crack that open and helped train the CVCs about the space, so then become extremely value add. So that then is value add for the VC community. So now, if you have the right CVC within on a cap table, that really helps, right? And so we see that, I saw over time with JetBlue Ventures, I saw that VCs whom I built really good relationships, if there was ever anything in the travel space, they would come to us and say, hey, what do you think about this? Because they didn't know enough about it, right? And if we liked it, then they would invest. Sometimes we would co-invest, sometimes we wouldn't. And in fact, then full circle from that, a lot of startups, when they would go pitch for like a Series B, so they've now done a seed and a Series A, and they're pitching for a B, it kind of got around that if you didn't have JetBlue Ventures on your cap table, you better have a pretty good reason why. So we had many startups coming to us say, hey, we're told you need to be an investor with us to validate us. So,
No, and I think there is something to say, and maybe you could speak to that, of having on your cap table financial VCs and corporate VCs, rather than just one or the other.
Yeah, I think they bring both. They bring really good, I think that the CVCs bring some connection to the industry, some advice, et cetera. Sometimes you're able to actually deploy with them, but it's super important that the CVCs don't constrain the startup and say, well, you can't work for the competitor.
Yeah.
Right? That just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the first things. And then I think CVC's now gotten to the place where they don't restrict. So it adds some of that practical knowledge at the board level usually, which the VCs like. But on the same hand, the VCs bring that financial discipline. And, some startups, they'll just continue on and be zombies. Like they're getting revenue, they're profitable, there's no exit. But, we need to have an exit, So, yeah.
You talk about financial discipline. You talked about the need for you to recruit someone in the investment team that came from a financial discipline. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about how you started JetBlue Ventures and how you thought about the first few recruitments? Because this is where the audience would probably want to know, how did you get started?
Right.
So you already set the scene that you knew the corporation inside out so well, but you knew nothing about VC, and you had the call a friend card, but talk about the first few recruits, because they are the critical ones, really, in a way.
Yeah, so, you can call a friend for how to, help with terms, just how to understand various things, but a friend is not going to help you make investment decisions. They don't want to have anything to do with that, right?
For good reasons.
Yeah, exactly, liability or whatever. So you really, and you don't want to do, especially if you're a CVC from a public company, like you've got to be very, very careful of what you do. You don't want to bring a liability to the company back, you don't want to end up on the front page that such and such company invested in this and they've, had an accident
misbehaved,
right? And so it's super important to have that financial. I think like I said, Raj Singh was my very first hire. He educated me so much and helped me really grow. And he had such financial discipline. I learned. It took me. I was leading the team for 5 years, and in 5 years, by the time I moved on, I probably learned a tenth of what he knew. But it was enough to me. Like I knew what to go to him for, and then that's really, really important. And so I think that it's now if a CVC, the opposite is also the case. So if a CVC hires an investment professional first, you've got to hire an operational person who knows the company. Otherwise, what'll happen, you might make good financial decisions, but then you're just an alternative investment class on the mothership's balance sheet. Yeah, and it's just you're not relevant to the company. So you have to have both.
So we just did a keynote panel at the GCV Monterey 2025, and you talked about it's not about strategic or financial, it's all about financial in a way. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So I think one of the big questions that always comes up on corporate venture, are you a strategic investor or are you a financial investor? And I would say it's always financial, but in a different way of thinking about it. So instead of saying strategic or financial, I say you want strategic returns, investment returns. They're both financial, right? They're getting returns, right? So investment returns pretty straightforward. You put in $1 million, you get 10 million, that's 10x return on your exit. That's pretty clean. Strategic returns are a little harder to quantify, but in general, like for most companies, it either increases revenue or reduces cost. From the JetBlue perspective, because it was an airline, it was also about enhancing safety, which indirectly, of course, reduced cost and adds revenue, and customer service. So those were kind of the areas when we were looking at investing in something, did it somehow, and especially early on, have a path towards providing that? And in fact, two of the startups that we invested on very early on, one impacts revenue, one is cost.
Please double click on both of them. I think they are good examples you shared during the keynote, which first you could describe each of them, but how you decided to invest in them.
Yeah, so both of them were very early. They're both seed stage, 6-10 people with a good idea. One of them was around dynamic pricing for airline revenue, using sort of some AI tools. And the other was about weather prediction, using a lot of data sources, AI tools. Mind you, this was in 2016, 2017, before AI was a thing, right? Yep. So that's, again, why having a seat at the table is so important. And both of them almost went under several times, right? Just getting through those early stages. And we came along to help. But I had this vision that they would help us. So let's talk about one of them. So Flyer, it's called Flyer. and they do the dynamic pricing for airlines. So, let's say that we invest $1 million. I mean, that wasn't exact amount. I don't remember even what the amount was. But let's just say we invest $1 million. A 10x, I mean, a return the money is important, at least $1 million. Double your money is great. Triple your money is great. Like, you literally look for maybe a 10x. Like, you want to invest, that's a kind of a measure. Can they get to 10x? That's $10 million. And then, wow, if you really hit out of the park, you get a 100x return, right? Okay, so airlines. Airlines, very, very thin margin, but massive revenue. So JetBlue last year, $9.3 billion in revenue. So if you could increase revenue by, a tenth of a percent by doing some AI dynamic pricing, that's $9.3 million a year. Yep. That's your 10x right there almost, right? And if you can increase it by 1%, you're talking $93 million in 1 year.
Which compounds every year.
Exactly. Yep. So you can see, that is what I'm talking about is strategic returns. So that's one great example. Now, Flyer hasn't exited yet, so it's not an exit, but it has increased revenue. Now, sometimes it's hard to predict. Is the revenue because of this, because of that? Like, It's a little harder, a little squishier, but I guarantee you, it's provided enormous strategic value.
With very early access.
Very early access. Oh yeah. We actually helped them pivot because they were doing some kind of airline fare lock. They could predict. It was interesting because I went to them and their business model was around providing an insurance product. Fare lock, basically, which now some airlines have it, where you go on, you go on a website and you say, this price is, $200 for this ticket. You're like, I don't know, I'm not ready to buy a ticket yet. And then by the time you get ready to buy a ticket, it's $300, and you're like, I wish I bought the ticket in. Well, what they could do is they could predict what the airfare was going to be the following week or whatever, and so they would predict if it was, and they could determine if it was going to be like $300. I'm like, wait a minute. Show me. You could predict. So I had them, I picked a whole bunch of routes with a whole bunch of different airlines. And I said, okay, a week from now. So you tell me what it's going to be a week from now. And they document it. And then a week would go by. I'm like, I'll be done. They're actually pretty accurate. But that's a consumer product and it's super hard and such. And I'm like, but wait a minute. If you can predict revenue, and airlines can't collude, so you can't. So you can then help inform, like, why is the price going up? And then you can determine, and then most airlines, the price, if one airline makes the price go up, then the others will follow. But if you could be the first, you're going to capture, the
value.
So, ultimately they pivoted from this insurance product to revenue platform. And and JetBlue was an early tester for them, and that gave them credibility then to go to other airlines, and they're with a bunch of other airlines right now. And unfortunately, I think they're not at any airlines that are competitors of JetBlue, but we didn't restrict them on that, right?
Yeah.
A lot of international airlines really saw some value in it. I think they're a launch customer for like Riyadh Air, Middle East right now. Anyway, it's been that's an example where we really helped the company pivot. There were a couple of times where there were days from going under, and we'd lose our investment and such, and I'd connect them with one other investor because we have a good ecosystem. And sure enough, they made it, and that like I said, the company, I think their last valuation is somewhere near $1 billion. Yeah, I would love for
amazing.
them. Yeah, we are seed, so we're like, and someday they'll have an exit, I hope. But if they didn't, we brought that strategic value. So then the other one was this weather platform, which is, again, same thing. We were with them. They were actually, I want to say, they were 6 guys. One was a former Israeli fighter pilot, so understood the weather. Another one was really good in the marketing side of things. And they had this idea to predict weather, and they had some trials with local baseball stadiums because whether a baseball and they were from Boston, they're MIT, and so Fenway Park. No, is that? I think that's. I'm not sure which one it is in Boston.
Okay.
Anyway, whichever the baseball stadium is there, and so they were doing some trials there, and airlines rely very, very heavily on weather, but it's also airlines are. Especially operational people are very risk averse, which you want. And so there are official licensed software that is used that you get approved by the FAA and all that kind of stuff to run the weather intelligence for airlines. And the startup kept wanting to be that. I'm like, guys, you're not ready yet. You're not ready. We have to, and so they started, doing trials with the Boston station, just Boston, because it was there. And we fostered them over time. And they used our name. That's kind of what CVCs do. That brings good value to those startups that then helped them get into the insurance products market, in various other areas. But they kept, because the CEO's, pilot, he was just passionate in aviation. So this was, I think we invested in 2017. They became the official weather platform, kicking out the weather company, was owned by IBM. So we're talking very, very established company.
Incumbent, very entrenched.
Very entrenched. In 2022, wow. And they are the weather platform for JetBlue. They've also deployed with other airlines and also other places, other businesses around the world, because weather is especially now. And it's been fascinating. They've launched satellites. They just got 2 more that went up on the latest SpaceX flight. They launched them last week, so they've got 8 satellites. They pulled data from all different places. Currently, what a lot of companies do is even the established platforms, the weather companies, pull from the National Weather Service. There's currently in the U.S. now some challenges happening in terms of government funding for various things. Yep. And literally, there was an article. Who knows where this is going, but there was a Fortune article saying this company could be our future weather prediction, because NOAA was losing some funding. So National Oceanic, and so Tomorrow.io is really they're over $1 billion valuation as well, and they are reducing it. In order to the hurdle to pass to get into an airline in the nerve center of the operations center, which is as risk averse as they come. That really shows that this platform is great. And so I'm excited to see where it goes. So it's reducing the cost. It gets back to the strategic value. I don't know if we'll have an exit. I'm pretty sure we will. It
could be a good exit.
Really good exit. But more importantly, it's improving the decision making at the airline, which reduces weather cancellation costs, which reduce overcall. Cancellations, it's, first of all, customers hate it, of course. Yep. They understand when it's absolutely massively storming in a particular airport, and whether people understand that. But what they don't understand is that airplane was supposed to go, let's say it was going to go from JFK to Orlando, and then Orlando back to JFK. Well, it's canceled. There's a big storm in JFK. Everybody gets it. We don't want to fly in that storm. But the people in Orlando's flight's going to be canceled because there's no plane to get down there. And it's a beautiful sunny day in Florida. Yeah. And you've canceled my flight for weather. That doesn't make any sense. You're lying to me. Well, no, it was. So what you can then do is predict the weather, what's going to happen at JFK. You can make that cancellation earlier. You can then reroute the plane. Maybe that plane could come to JFK and then get routed into service or maintenance service or whatever a day early. And the plane that was in maintenance service could come out a day early, and you can route that plane to Florida before the weather comes. So you make all these, and now you're not canceling the Florida flight. So this is huge in that decision making. So it's been very helpful.
So clearly strategic for JetBlue at the time. Mm-hmm. Early access to technology that is now being deployed and really successful. But you kind of hinted on the strategic value that JetBlue brought to this company, not just brand and credibility, but also guidance. Uh-huh. Can you speak to that in terms of how you design, and this is really a design question, how did you design JetBlue Ventures to be bringing such strategic value to the startups you invested in?
Yeah, so we built out, so it was not just the investment side, which is super important, and it's hard for me that was leading it to be able to do everything, right, and to really help foster all my children, I would call them, all the various portfolio companies. And so we really needed to scale and bring out, now it's called the platform. This is before it was called, there wasn't platforms. This is early on.
How did you call it at the time?
I called it the operational team.
Okay.
JetBlue Ventures operations. Now it's called platform. People out of CVC don't know what you mean by platform, by the way, but
it's coming.
It's
coming.
Yeah. So the operations team, and so the operations team would help. Startups, they think that you invest in a company because the founder's passionate, and they just exude and they believe in their product and everything. They have no clue how big companies run, and they just think they should just, set me up with the CEO. Set me up with the CEO, show him, and it is amazing. No, I'm not going to set you with the CEO. CEO is not going to first won't take the meeting, but second of all, CEO doesn't know. They're going to go to their expert, the VP of whatever, and ask what they think. But if you haven't met with the VP, and
then boom.
Oh, by the way, even the VP, he's going to want to know what the directors say, right? So you have to get in at that age and area, and and by the way, your stuff isn't ready for it. Like if you actually, like I remember the weather, the Tomorrow.io, they were called Climaso when they first started. They wanted indoor ops center. I'm like, guys, you're not ready. You're not ready. If JetBlue actually used you, all your servers would crash and everything. Like you're not ready. You have to get your platform ready before we do that. Yep. And you're only going to get one chance.
Yep, one shot.
One shot. So you've got to be ready. And so helping be that navigator. And same thing, we used to run these innovation sprints, and still do actually, where there's a need on the business side. And the business says, okay, we have this problem. And so then the ventures team, platform, would go out and find a whole bunch of startups. They'd pull into the investment side's portfolio database and startup database, and they'd pick like 100, let's say it's a customer service issue. We want to automate our customer service more. So there's a lot of those kinds of tools out there, a lot of different companies. And so we'd find 100 of them. And we give that list to the team, and we'd help them look at the startups. Even the act of down selecting from 100 to 10
is huge.
Like they all of a sudden learn so much just from that process. So we would guide, and that's before even talking to them. It's just doing desktop research. And then we would bring those 10, and we'd coach the 10. We'd work with them on their pitches.
You prepare them in advance.
In advance to pitch to the business. And then we bring the business out with the VP and the directors and the managers and a couple of analysts, and they come for an innovation day in Silicon Valley. So they're all mindsets. So it's an open mindset. It's not a come pitch the business. It's I'm coming to learn. And so then it's like magic happens. And if it also helps us look at product market fit too. Is this a company we would be interested in investing in? And so sometimes we would invest in a company whether or not the team or the department was ready to implement them. Usually they weren't ready to implement them.
But there was a wish to start with.
There was a wish to start, yeah. So it's like, okay, there's something there. And then sometimes we would allow them, they'd do a pilot test, and we'd help, and we wouldn't invest, but it's just a pilot test. And again, that exercise helps the startup learn how to work with the corporate, learns how the corporate to work with the startup, even if the pilot doesn't go anywhere. So it's one of those win-wins.
So I think there's a golden nugget, which is on the sprints, because it all starts there from talking with the motherships groups about their wish. Can you speak about how you design the sprints and maybe improve them over time to be really effective?
Yeah, honestly, they've been super effective since the beginning. The first thing is to start with that large list. And I think initially we just gave the list to the corporate's just too busy. There's a day-to-day job, and they just saw it as a chore to go look at things. And so what we did, and that was at the director, manager level, we're like, okay, why don't you send us a couple of your young analysts? Not send it, and then we would then meet with them, who were super excited to work with JetBlue Ventures. This is so to them, they were excited because then they would get to pitch to their bosses which ones they liked. So it's kind of like getting that.
The champions.
Yeah. So, we're like, we work with these analysts and say, okay, here's 100. Why don't you narrow it down to 20? And then you can show then you can work with your have meetings with directors. Which of the 20, and then let the directors pick the 10. So it helped get all of them in. Of course, they're all rooting for their favorites, and now it becomes kind of a real spirited thing. So it's you have to find this entree into the company where there's personal motivation to do something, and you have to come at the right level. And sometimes that level is an analyst. And that analyst gets personally passionate. And so, of course, I come from the talent side, like HR. And so human motivation is around, in work. People go to work saying, I want to do a good job, right? And how do you define a good job? Well, it depends on what the boss says, right? And so I want to impress my boss. And so I want to show my boss, I have this multi-talent. And so it gets them motivated to do it. And part of, again, building the talent side, a lot of companies, they will measure, there's some measure of success for a leader around how well do you develop your team.
Yes.
And so this was built into JetBlue as a way to develop your team.
It sounds like pure goodness.
Yeah.
But what you said also is, because that comes from a wish, and clearly you unlock potential of the humans who are behind this, you end up being able to know which startups really would be valuable to invest. It's like a superpower that you built into your sprints all the way to down selecting and looking at these startups.
Yeah, because then we would, on the platform team, so we had, I called the operations team, now called the platform team, there's also analysts down there. So there's analysts on the investment side that do all their work to figure out and then they then get matched up. Okay, you're going to run an innovation sprint on whatever, customer service. And that analyst now is paired up with the analyst at the corporate to walk them through how to analyze things. So they then are the hosts of the innovation sprint. So they too are super invested in the whole thing. And then the investment team doesn't get too involved on it. They're busy working deals. So the platform team is the host for this innovation sprint, and the investment team then becomes guests at the innovation sprint to see the pitches, which have been customized for JetBlue on the platform team. So now the platform team is helping the investment team.
Very nice. And you have like a handshake or a moment where it's transferred from the investment team to the platform team. How did you think about that transition from closing the investments to supporting it?
Oh, yeah. So at the very beginning, the investment team is always out there sourcing startups. They go into a database, whatever database tool you use. Then the platform team uses the investment team database to pull the ecosystem that come into the funnel. The platform team works with the company to narrow it down. And ultimately, now the investment team comes to the thing and says, I'm now interested in this, rather than doing random pitches. I mean, it's annoying to do random pitches, how many pitches? Okay.
It's not effective.
No, it's not. And so now the investment team says, regardless of whether it's going to do a proof of concept or not, the investment team now will do what an investment team does. They'll follow up more, they'll do due diligence, et cetera. Meanwhile, if there's a POC, it's good. The platform team is listening to see what the investment is. Is there a there once you lift the hood? Because if it's not, then we don't do the. But now if it's going to be an investment, the investment team works with it. Platform team is involved or not, depending on if the startup is involved with the company or not. Once an investment happens, if the investment happens and it is a startup that is something that might be involved with the company, there's engagement on the both sides until it actually is. So typically it's the investment team that sits on the board or is the board observer or gets the board, maintains the main part of the relationship. The platform team helps set up the introductions at the parent company. Once there's an implementation, whether it's a proof of concept, then the platform team is going to spend much more time with that startup and then report back to the investment team. Is this working? Is it working? Et cetera.
So you're like the OG of the platform team before it was called platform team. But I can see that your platform team could engage with not just the portfolio companies, but also the startups you had not invested in. And how did you think about that? Because most of the platform team we see is typically for the portfolio companies. But here you were already thinking, no, it could be wherever the value is for the mothership.
Remember, it's strategic value, right?
Exactly.
And even better to, let's say, a lot of companies, startups, aren't going to give a financial return. They may just kind of truck along, especially in kind of an operational area. They become AK zombie companies from an investment perspective. They're never going to have an exit. But and so if they're not going to have an exit, like we're not going to invest in them, right? That's the investment side. But if they're going to provide strategic value, okay, that's even better. I don't have to put any capital out to invest, and I'm going to get my strategic value, right? My strategic returns. So the platform team has a different twist on this whole thing.
And what I've seen is you're building intimacy with these entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
You're starting to bring value even before you invest.
Yeah.
So if you do decide to invest, you're more likely to get in.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so sometimes we'll, just like any venture firm, we might decide not to invest because it's too early, but then we could come in at the Series A or B later on. Most of the time, I think JetBlue Ventures, and although I'm no longer at JetBlue Ventures, I'm obviously in a different company now, went in house, but at JetBlue Ventures, we're seed Series A. So by the time they were B, it was outside. But they might come in at seed, and I think we pivoted more to Series A over time, or a note, like the sweet spot was a note into the A, because that'll help. That we give validation then for the rounds for the Series A, so that also gave us a discount. So that was really the sweet spot as a note. But we would not go in the seed sometimes because it's like, we don't know if it's going to work. So that's where the platform team kind of keeps nurturing them. And if it's going to go somewhere, then we might come in a little bit later.
I like the approach of the notes to the Series A.
Yeah.
I think that's prudent first, but also step by step. But you just mentioned, actually, I think there's something really cool about the way you speak is you say we are. So I think it's still your children.
Yes.
And it's your child. Yeah. But you moved on, and I want to talk about the succession plan, because that's something we don't talk a lot about in CVCs, but you were the founder, the head of the CVC. Clearly, most people associated JetBlue Ventures to Bonny. How did you anticipate and plan? I knew you had like a year to plan it at least, so can you speak to the succession planning?
Yeah, so like I said, most CVCs, at least the ones that are established, have kind of a platform team, a head of the platform team, operations team, I call it back then, and the investment team. So I had two amazing leaders, and both are now heads of CVCs. So I couldn't go wrong, right?
No, you could not go wrong.
And it depends on whether or not there's more bias towards investment returns or strategic returns, as to which would be a better path to go. But in the end, it's also whoever leads it has to know both. And so I think it's easier. It's not easy. It's easier for someone on the operations side to learn the investment than for the investment side to get the deep knowledge of the operations. Both can work out. And ultimately, so Amy ended up taking on, has done a great job. Raj ended up going to a CVC that had more financial investment returns. Perfectly suited for both. That's a classic example. Both succeeded, and so it's been very, very, very successful.
I think one of the advice you gave on stage was also platform team should learn from the investment team from the platform team. How did you codify that or put processes in place, or was it just organic?
I think it's fairly, first of all, it's just a good team that works together. Like everybody works together. And, we had team meetings. I think I'm very much an in-person like teams. And then of course we had COVID, which made things more distributed. Now the team's back together again. We actually moved the office. So that it had been in San Carlos, which is when we launched. It needed to be in Silicon Valley, but it was expensive.
There.
Yeah, it was expensive to be up in the city or to be in Palo Alto. So we ended up in San Carlos. It was somewhat in between. It was near the train station because we had people who, members of the team who lived in San Francisco, members who lived in South Bay. So it was a nice central location. And then after COVID, real estate got super cheap in San Francisco, and a large majority of the team were there, so that had made it easier. Because during COVID, then it was a little more distributed, and it was kind of hard, a little bit hard to be connected. So anyway, in-person meetings, in-person just being there together, a couple of days a week, and just, like I said, the platform team would participate in kind of the pre-investment team, and when we were going to the investment committee, the investment committee team would present to the platform team, like, here's why, here's what we're doing, and they kind of work together on the investment memo and things like that. And then when an investment actually happened, then the platform team is involved. And then likewise on the sprints and such, the platform team would bring the investment team. So it's just, you look at, it's kind of like I have a left hand and I have a right hand. They're connected to my body. And it'd be pretty hard for me to do things with one hand or the other.
You shouldn't.
Yeah.
You should take advantage of both. Very nice. So there is something I wanted to ask you on the keynote, but I didn't get the chance. everyone talk about jockey or horse, especially in early stage. Typically, we say this is a jockey, the entrepreneur, and you've backed amazing jockeys, entrepreneurs. Can you speak to how you assess an entrepreneur? Once you've done the desktop research with your team and you narrow down to the few startups, how do you get to assess really if that entrepreneur is the one you want to back?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's no secret. Being an entrepreneur and getting a successful startup to scale and up to a multi-million, multi-billion-dollar exit, it's hard work. It's really hard work. And a person has to be doing it for all the right reasons. They have to want to be doing it not because of the financial returns, but because they believe in the product, they believe in, and they have the right skill set. So that's one piece. And then they have to be able to build a team. So, I don't invest in the founder. I invest in the founder and the team. Mm-hmm. So, and sometimes it's co-founders, like a lot of companies and startups, lots of studies, it needs to be two. We invested in many that weren't two. And sometimes having two can be a challenge later as you scale. Like which one, you can't have co-CEOs. That's just as you scale. And so, but you have to have the right team. You have to have the right team. And so it was super important for me to meet the team and to meet the founder and how do they, founder or founders, and how do they complement each other? How does the team work together? Because a single founder just can't. You have to have that mission-driven team.
Yeah, I mean, we play with the fact that TDK is from the magnets. We say we're looking for magnetic founders, people who are going to attract A players around them.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I like that.
So, if we think about how you interview them or in person and you try to look at the interaction, any golden nuggets or things you were watching out or something which for you saw as red flags?
No, I mean, they have to have, so they need the right team, but they have to have an intimate knowledge of it. So if there wasn't, like we'd ask some pretty deep technical questions or on whatever, most of the startups we had are in the technical space. And they had to have some there. If there was hand waviness, that became a real problem. And then also integrity was so important, super important to us, especially as a public company. So, VCs, they can make, scattered investments and, don't have to dive as deep maybe in some of those things. We had to dive super deep because we're a public company. Yep. And the other piece, I told every single startup we worked with when we started looking at their data room and their documents and everything, and I said, look, working with us, I'm going to tell you right now, it will be very painful going through the data room and going through the document phase. And you will say you're doing it's overkill. And it might be for that state. We're investing in a seed company. Of course their documents aren't going to be right. I said, but by the time you get to an A, you have to have your documents buttoned up. And so you might as well go through it now with us as a friendly helping you, because we would help them like, you need to have these IP assignments. Oh, you need to have these, employment contracts. You have to have this, you have to have that, And I say, so, if they were reluctant to do that, then, if we found, and we always found, lift up a rock, lots of squiggly things underneath there, like what's in their data room. If it's messy, I was fine. But how did it react to me telling him it was messy? That was super important to me.
That's a golden nugget.
Yeah.
I think there is something you said about setting expectations, that it will be a heavy due diligence upfront.
Yeah.
I think that's something I learned myself, which was if you don't set it upfront, then they're going to be really upset later. Yeah. So I think it's good to do that. But looking at how they react when you give the feedback about it's messy is really helpful because it will tell you whether directionally they will be able to prepare for the big customers, the next round of funding.
And also, how do they take feedback? Constructive feedback. I don't want a defensive person because, in the end of the day, their business model is going to pivot 5 times. There's going to be a lack of product market fit, and they're going to have to make decisions. And how do they think? And if the founder is such a strong personality that they won't take feedback, the company's not going to be successful.
Yeah, we sometimes see it as coachability. Will they take feedback and then take it forward?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask a question which it's an opinion, of course. you can't do a parallel universe, but you were clearly trusted by JetBlue. You were a pilot and you moved to different leadership functions. How do you think it would have worked out if it was you but coming from the outside? So you would not have been in JetBlue. You would not know the corporate as deeply.
It would not be successful. I mean,
Okay.
and this isn't me. It's not because of me. It's because of a person from the inside. Because there were a lot of naysayers, and the reason it really got traction is because the CEO trusted me deeply,
Yep.
and the board trusted me deeply. I had a relationship with the board. Because uniquely for me, this wouldn't necessarily be the case for anybody, but it happened for me at JetBlue. I was at a leading talent at a time where there's a lot of change happening at JetBlue, and I was hiring a lot of the officers from the outside or promoting them from inside. So of the entire officer and director corps, I think there were 130 of them. I'd either hired or promoted 118 of 130. So I personally, literally knew everyone in the company. Now that's not normal,
Yep.
but nonetheless, to especially in JetBlue, if you think of the airline industry as a whole, it's very thin margins. And the other airlines had tried setting up ventures, but didn't get anywhere, really. And so to take somebody from the outside, when 3/4 of the leadership is going to be suspicious of this whole idea, because they're like, look, you're going to spend $10 million or $20 million, whatever, to this, investing in startups, and you're telling me to cut my budget? No. Right? And so there's a lot of opposition to that. And so it's super important to know the dynamics of the people. And okay, there's a certain department that is always having their budget cut, and they're very frustrated, and they're very anti-JetBlue Ventures. Well, what if I do an innovation sprint for them, and I help them with solving some of their big problems? And then they become champions. Because it's that internal friction in the mothership that can kill corporate ventures, and usually does.
And it does, yes. Actually, maybe we can give credits to your CEO for picking you, because you have to find the right person to lead this very nascent, with many naysayers type of approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it, So Robin was very helpful, and it was his idea in the end. Well, I came up with the idea of CVC, but it was his idea to launch it. But I also knew that there were certain stipulations in getting it going. I knew from is that a venture firm, corporate venture, any venture firm, you will not be providing returns in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. You're really not even going to see a path to good returns until 5. And I said, look, if we're going to do this, I need a 5-year commitment. A 5-year commitment, because otherwise I'm not going to waste my time. Because then it just contributes to the dumb money, right? It contributes.
Yep.
I let this company invest in me, and now they're going out of business.
And you prove the naysayers right.
Yeah. And so I said, look, so I wanted a commitment that this would last at least 5 years. And so that was written into kind of the corporate that they literally, now.
They can always change their mind.
It was literally written into the corporate documents of this entry period. Now, of course, a board has to have, and a leadership team has to have the rights in some terrible situation, to shut it down. And it was interesting is, there was no worst period for the airline industry than COVID, right? Every single airline worldwide had no customers overnight. And so you have no revenue, and it's thin margins. And then eventually, of course, most countries had to bail out their airlines. That was the case in JetBlue, and in the U.S. airline, it was a thing called CARES Act, and government put billions of dollars or million, I don't know how much, a lot into the airline industry. Now you could imagine during that period, JetBlue Ventures could not invest in startups because you could just see the headline. Government gives money to JetBlue and they invest in startups, right?
Yep, that would not be a good uptake.
No.
Yep.
So here was a CVC who could not invest for, it was a good 2-3 years in that period. And so normally a company would shut it down. But because there's been so much strategic value provided, then it like, no, we don't want to. And there were several companies, Joby, the company I work for now, that were on the verge of going public during the middle of COVID. They're like, oh, well, we want to be able to get our returns because it was an exit. It was a great exit for JetBlue Ventures. But if we'd shut down, there wouldn't be as much, you might have even liquidated the shares. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
And so it was smart that JetBlue, and so that, the company has lived past the 5 years, past the magic 7-year mark. So. Which
is truly amazing. And also, you had quite a portfolio already by that time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you could actually focus on making these portfolio companies successful.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, we invested in startups in the travel industry, not airlines specifically, but travel. And guess what industry was hit the hardest during COVID? The travel industry. So, and this is where even Joe Benny comes to me early on in COVID. And he's like, because he had been wanting me to come in, be a COO since the day I met him. I'm like, no, if it's a good job, no. And so I was a free advisor as a board member. But then COVID came, and so we kind of looked across our teams, and which companies should we provide some additional support for? And although salaries were cut and bonuses were cut, we still were working, but we couldn't do investments.
Yep.
And so it's like, okay, so we picked different startups and different people worked on them. And I spent about 3/4 of my time working on Joby, helping the company get prepared to go public. And then eventually, when it looked like we would, it made sense. And both Amy and Raj were ready to, take over, either one, but ready to and I had done, I'd been there 5 years. So it was just a really good transition time. And so the company really fostered it. I got off the payroll.
Yep.
And that reduced the cost because again, we had to cut the cost of the CVC during that period. That was beneficial to JetBlue. I moved into Joby, helped to take the company public, which was great returns, which then funded the CVC, which then helped it continue to get through the valley of death, if you will, for a CVC. And so it's, again, it's all goodness around. But you have to be very intentional in it.
Now, I want to talk about some corporate venturing best practices that came from your investment in Joby, especially as it regards you bringing an amazing syndicate player, Toyota Ventures with Jim.
Yeah, so early on, again, setting up, I'm going to step back even further. So when we set up the structure of JetBlue Ventures, there were a couple things that were super important. One was that we needed a 5-year roadmap. I needed to be able to hire investment professional, and you can't hire investment professional in venture unless you have carry. Yep. And so that's a very foreign concept to corporate. So we ended up with a phantom carry, but it was effectively and I wanted an investment committee that included at least one person from the outside. Which that also is a foreign idea. Like, what? Whoa. We're gonna have somebody from the outside deciding what we invest. I'm like, no, you don't understand. And so ultimately, I ended up getting to know Jim Adler from Toyota Ventures. He had a good friend. We'd met through mutual friends, and I just thought he would be the perfect person to be on the investment committee. So he interviewed around. Yep, he's great. So he was on the investment committee. Now this is before I had invested we had invested in Joby, and so I'm a firm believer, just like all venture capitalists, that you should syndicate, bring other along. And so when I went to look at Joby for us to invest in them, I right away said, look, this company needs an auto OEM. It's great, it's an airline, that's great, but it's manufacturing, right? And so I mentioned to the founder, and I knew all the CVCs, all the auto OEM CVCs. What about this one? Nope, they're too slow. What about this one? Nope, don't like the person. No. And I said, what about Toyota? He's like, Toyota? That's interesting. Toyota production, that could be very valuable, but that would be hard to close quickly. And I'm like, nah, I got a friend. So called Jim Adler. I'm like, Jim, you need to see this startup. And he's like, no, I don't know. I'm like, no, trust me. Drop everything, go see the startup. And for a variety of reasons, the investment window was very short. And a lot of founders like to say, oh, if you don't close in 2 weeks, I'm not interested. They try to rush you to a close. There was actually a very valid reason, an event that was happening. It was like they needed the money during that period, or it wasn't a window. So it was a note into the this one was a note into the B. They were already Series A, so it was a note into the B. And needed 2 weeks. And the founder's like, maybe you guys, JetBlue Venture, can close in 2 weeks because you're nimble, but there's no way Toyota could. They did because of Jim. So we co-invested, and he also was on the Joby board. We were both board observers very early on. Both were helping with the company, and then it became an important part. So Toyota was looking to become more than an auto company, which is why they set up Toyota Ventures in the first place. And they ultimately moved to what they're now a mobility company. But back then they were like, I don't know what we're going to be, but and so they, Jim was really instrumental in getting Toyota to be more involved. Brought the Toyota executives. They got very interested in this space. Toyota actually used to be, early on, the Toyota family at the very beginning, before it was really even Toyota, really wanted to have an aviation side to it. And actually, there is an aviation division of Toyota. Nobody even knows about them, called Aerosahi, but very small. But it's just been this fascination of aviation. So it kind of sparked this interest. So then once Toyota got more interested, they then ended up leading a Series C for $500 million.
$500 million.
$500 million.
And this is the mothership at that point.
This is the mothership, yeah, it's the mothership. And then when they invest that amount of money, they need to make sure the money is going to be so successful. So they set a lot of engineers. We're, setting up our production systems and all of that. And so Toyota's been very, very involved. They've since, we announced in about October another investment. So overall, it's almost $1 billion on the roadmap for that. And so they're and they call themselves a mobility company. So it is actually pivoting Toyota too.
It's an amazing story for Toyota. But it's also an amazing story about the syndicate building and getting the right partners who bring different superpowers.
Yeah. I mean, I knew, of course, at this point, so it was 2017, we're still pretty early on. JetBlue Ventures started in 2016, so it's 2017. But, CVC is a small ecosystem. We have the GCV community, and I knew all of the CVCs in auto space, but also just aviation in general. Airlines weren't doing it too much. Some international ones, but IAG was doing something. Some innovation areas. Delta was looking at innovation, but there were some in like the Honeywell and some of the other suppliers and such. And so I knew the ecosystem, and knowing which ones would be the right one to bring to the table was important, because a CVC can slow down a company. So you want to find the right partner.
That's a key point.
And I didn't know Toyota, but I knew Jim Adler. So, and he's a disruptor. He moves fast, and he was brought in to help Toyota move fast. And so
he's decisive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about GCV. Well, in GCV Monterey right now, and you were the chair from 2017 to 2020. How do you see the community and industry standards from then to now?
Yeah, there's just been so much evolution. I think initially it still was a bit niche-y, and VCs were still, back in 2016, 2017, they were very reluctant to take on CVCs. And so I think this was a community where at least you could have others to commiserate with, if you will. Right? Yeah. But what has happened is I think that the CVC industry has matured over time. A lot of good firms, TDK, many others, Shell, on and on and on. That now is a real established piece. And I think, I think VCs welcome CVCs. And I think that corporates begin to see value, the platform side, and startups see the value. So I think everyone's seeing the value in it, and that was not so much the case back in 2017 and then 2020. Then honestly, COVID impacted so much the investment industry. It also kind of separated the wheat from the chaff. Like, who made it through? Obviously, TDK did through. So it shows which ones are strong, and if you can make it through that period, it strengthens.
What's your wish for the community now, let's say 2030? How do you think it's going to move away from niche to more established? How do you see the next 5 years?
it's a very interesting time right now. It's hard to say. I think, because of the internet, because of AI, because of, there's just things move so much faster. I think that companies that have a CVC, again, you have a seat at the table to see things early on.
Yeah.
AI, you can go from, a nothing into a multi-billion-dollar company fairly quickly, because scaling becomes easier. And so you can miss the boat pretty fast. So I think it's going to become even more important. But it is also at the same time, when corporations, when there's uncertainty, stock market's uncertain, there's just in general uncertainty, corporates have a hard time deciding to start corporate venturing. So I think it's a period we might see fewer new corporate ventures, and we'll see strengthening of existing ones. There'll be a cycle. There's always a cycle. I think the next few years, I think, is going to be challenging for new entrants in the space. It's really going to be harder to provide value, so they're going to have to work even harder.
Very nice. And then if you were to give one advice, my final question, to someone starting a CVC today, what would be your advice to them?
Network. I think, it's a little bit of of an old saying, hey, can I get coffee with you? Because most people are just tired of those kinds of things. So you need to figure out a way that you can provide value to someone else and then come to them. It's one thing if someone says, oh, can I have coffee with you? But if you actually come meet me at my office, make it easy for me, but spending time and educate yourself, I think it's so important. There's a lot of information out there, whether it's through GCVI or for others, right? Learn. So don't ask stupid questions. Learn as much as you possibly can. There's a lot of case studies, really good case studies. Stanford's done case studies, at Harvard's done case studies in corporate venture. Read up on it, and then come to good conferences and things like that. It's just super important to network.
I feel like I should mention we have the IESC case study, which is available also in Harvard Publishing on TDK Ventures.
And there's one on JetBlue Ventures at Stanford. So they're literally that one. Kudos, I'd love to read the case study there. The one that we did with Stanford was like how to set up a CVC.
Yeah, nice, perfect. Thank you so much, Bonny. It was amazing. Thank you.
Yes, nice. Thank you.